Did you know that this is absolute proof that God is real?
Perfect, because that's exactly what we're here for today. Is there actually any proof for God? Does God actually exist? Well, apparently some people on TikTok have figured it all out, so let's take a look at what they say. Then we can decide for ourselves whether what they're saying makes sense.
Science has in fact discovered God, and you can talk to the hardline atheists and they will say, it looks like science has indeed discovered God.
Oh really? Then I'm really looking forward to this one, because as far as I'm aware, atheists still exist.
How are we going to have this idea, is there a God or not? Notice that the creation force isn't the three-letter word God. If you look at the words carefully, it's a quantum fluctuations. So look what science has discovered. We can create the universe from absolute nothing, provided we have the forces of nature.
Well, that is completely not true. That is not what the Big Bang Theory is, and it's not what the Big Bang Theory states. The Big Bang Theory isn't necessarily the start of the universe or existence as a whole, but the Big Bang Theory is the beginning of our understanding of the universe as it currently is. So, the state of the universe now, where we see galaxies, planets, stars, those things could not have existed before the Big Bang. Now, I'm not saying the Big Bang caused a planet to fly off in a direction, stars to fly off in different directions. I'm just saying that the expansion of the universe allowed for those things to happen, before anyone tries to take that out of context. It kind of goes against the idea of anything he's saying here because, well, energy cannot be created or destroyed. So something must have existed before the Big Bang. And there's no reason to just throw the word God in there and hope for the best. That's the lazy route. We want to know the real reason as to why these things happened. The universe did exist. It just didn't exist in the way that we currently see the universe around us now. And certainly not in a way that could create anything that could form into anything like matter. So not even hydrogen would have existed back then in the way that it does now.
Now the laws of nature, the forces of nature aren't physical, they act on the physical. So if they create the universe, that means they predate the universe. So now we have a set of forces, we call them the laws of nature, that are not physical, that are able to act on the physical. They create the physical from absolute nothing. And they predate the universe, which means they predate our understanding of time. Put that together, it sounds very familiar. If you haven't noticed it, that's the biblical definition of God.
Just a quick question on that there, because that's a different definition to most people, where he cannot interact with the real world because he's not a part of our real world anymore. He's beyond time and he's beyond space, which is how you say it, but he apparently can interact with the physical world. But if he is beyond those dimensions, he can't be interacting with the physical world. So I'm kind of glad you put that in there, because it does kind of defeat the argument there, I suppose. But my next question is how? How does something that has no space and time interact with space and time? If he has no moment in which he can say magic words to make things happen, and then they happen in our reality at a specific time and space and location, then how does that work? And if he's not within any spatial dimension, how does he have the ability to interact with our spatial dimensions? You haven't proven anything, you've just claimed his abilities to be this, and that's that. And if that's the biblical definition of God, and we are to take the Bible literally, as I assume this is where we're going generally, that the Bible must literally be true if we're using the Bible as evidence, then why are we humanoids? Because doesn't it say we are made in God's image? So therefore shouldn't we be without spatial dimension and without a temporal dimension? It doesn't make sense if that's God, because if we are going to say that that is God, then surely God is the universe. As does generally people in science would say that the universe before the Big Bang wasn't nothing. It did exist, just in a completely different state that we understand and we see the universe now, then surely that's God, right? That's what you're saying. So, before the Big Bang, the God was in a state of a singularity of what I assume would be some form of state of energy, but that would be the entirety of the universe in one state of energy. The only way I can understand this in a biblical sense would be that God is the universe. Not a living entity, not something with conscious thought or ability to understand anything around it, just the universe itself. But then if we're created in God's image, as the Bible says, then why are we not the universe itself?
There's only one nuance that's left hanging. We can talk about it another time, perhaps.
Sure, only one, beyond the many that I have already mentioned prior to this, along with your misrepresentation of the Big Bang Theory, hopefully misunderstanding, hopefully. But sure, we'll talk about it another time.
It's that which created the universe, those forces active in the universe. But up to that point, science says you are correct. The definition of the biblical God is predates time, outside of time. God is not a physical being, is a force, and it creates the universe.
Well, that's 100% not true. Science does not agree that there is a God. In fact, science doesn't even attempt to disprove God. Science just attempts to understand the universe we live in and answer questions that we have based on reality. As you said, God is outside of our reality. It's outside of time and space. We don't really need to look into it because we couldn't have a test for it. That's kind of the point. We don't need to test for God because there is no proof for God. There shouldn't be proof for God, even if he exists. And isn't that the whole point? If you had proof for God, you wouldn't need faith. And for the religion to depend on faith to get you into heaven and to believe in your God, rather than to have proof presented to you, then you wouldn't need faith. It would just be fact. It kind of just simply defeats the whole idea of have faith.
You'll notice that the opening chapter of Genesis, the only name for God is Elohim, God as manifest in the universe. Science has indeed discovered the biblical God, or we just need one part left, crucial. That which created the universe is also active in the universe itself. The very fact that you're watching this now pretty much establishes that.
Here's another jumping conclusion here. So even if we take his idea on what is proof of God, let's say we just agree, let's say we have to, for whatever reason, he has proven definitively that God exists through this method of reasoning, through the Big Bang. There was nothing before the Big Bang and God spoke it into existence. Then that doesn't prove that the Christian God is true. Proving God and then proving a religion are two very different things, and one is much harder than the other, because trying to define a God is generally pretty vague, and with the lack of evidence to try to point anything to anyone, we could just say he exists and leave it at that. Nothing would change in our lives, nothing would change anything at all, because we don't have any proof that he exists in any way apart from books. But then other books would say that God is different, and they would have a completely different idea on God. As we have seen throughout ancient civilizations, throughout time, that started many religions, including Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Norse mythology, Egyptology. These are all different ideas on trying to approach just the concept of God. Trying to prove your specific religion is a lot harder, because your book, any religious book, is going to be trying to define God as they see from their own bias of a human mind, even if they believed that they were influenced by God. And my simple existence in watching this video is not proof of God. It's proof that I exist and I'm watching this video.
Of God. Number one, the fine-tuning of the universe. The universe is fine-tuned for life to exist. For example, the physical constants, such as the speed of light and the strength of gravity, are set to incredibly precise values. If any of these constants were changed slightly, the universe would be either too hot or too cold for life to exist.
And if that were the case, then we wouldn't be here to ponder the question. The only way to exist in your argument, even if it's completely wrong, is to believe in God. It's not evidence for God, it's evidence of a bias to believe in a God, maybe. But even then, who's to say that the universe in a different state couldn't have life? I love going back to a specific time period of the universe where, obviously from the Big Bang Theory, we have the expansion of the universe. And the Big Bang, as the universe was growing, because it didn't just happen instantly and it wasn't really an explosion, it was just the expansion of the universe. So, from going from a dense, super hot, incredibly hot environment, as it expands out, it's got more room for that temperature to spread out and cool down. With that in mind, going from hot to freezing, as it currently is today, we must have had a time period in which not only were there habitable zones around stars like we see today, but maybe the entirety of the universe was at a temperature where liquid water could have formed. Just randomly in space, there could be a planet with no star, but yet the heat of the universe would have been enough to create life. I say planet loosely because this could have just been a floaty ball of water, only held together by surface tension and minute amounts of gravity, in which life could have arose in these places such early on in the universe. So just because we see the universe as it is today and we could change those values ever so slightly and it would cause chaos, doesn't mean there isn't another situation in which life could have arose and posed the exact same question.
Number two, the origin of life. The origin of life is one of the greatest mysteries in science. Scientists have not yet been able to explain how life arose from non-living matter. However, the complexity and order of living organisms suggests that they were designed by a creator.
I don't really understand how the complexity of life would suggest a creator, doesn't require an intelligent design for complex things to occur. Forest fire is complex, doesn't mean someone had to have started it. It can start naturally. As for human beings, not all of us are designed in the exact same way. We walk upright on 2 feet and have 2 hands. That suggests we should carry things, maybe even heavy things. Now, I have a herniated disc, which was naturally caused. It was a genetic issue, maybe. Either way, there was no accident that caused it or anything along those lines. It just happened as I grew. Now, it'd kind of be cruel for an intelligent creator to create something designed to do something, but then give it something that would cause it pain to actually achieve that objective. So I disagree with the statement that God created complex organisms and that would make sense, because it doesn't. God could create complex things, but that would also mean that God isn't all good or all powerful, because he could achieve it another way but doesn't, so he's not all good. Or he simply couldn't do it another way, so he's not all powerful. Now, don't think that I hate God in any way, shape or form for this. Luckily for me, it's not that much of a problem. But if I didn't have this issue, then I wouldn't be here on YouTube, so I'm actually kind of happy that it is, and that it's also not too bad. There are other people who are worse, and that is unfortunate for them.
Number 3, the complexity of DNA. DNA is the molecule that contains the genetic code of all living organisms. DNA is incredibly complex and orderly, and it is difficult to imagine how it could have arisen by chance.
This argument's very similar to the other one, so all I'm going to add is, it is very complex and it would be difficult to try and achieve through random chance. However, not when you consider the fact that the Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. And that's a lot of years to be able to try and have random chance. Get lucky. This man won a car from a scratch card and they wanted him to reenact it for TV. So he went off and brought another scratch card, came back, scratched it off on camera, and showed that he'd just won $250,000. Absolutely crazy things can happen, even with undeniable odds. Even with the most extremely unlikely odds, if given enough time. Also, saying that science doesn't understand how life formed from non-living things is a bit misleading. It's not completely untrue. We don't fully understand how that happens. But if we're just talking about life itself, as in something that is alive, it doesn't have to be conscious, but something that's alive, then science currently has the hypothesis that life doesn't start as life. Maybe it starts as something in between life and not alive. For example, we can have something that's chemically active in the water, something that forms together bonds like chemical chains that causes reactions when it comes into contact with things, just completely randomly as it floats by. Like salt randomly falling in the ocean and then mixing, dissolving with the water, changing the water from fresh water to salt water. Chemical bonds can have a tendency to have preferences in this way, and using the same logic as evolution, random occurrences could cause a preference to form chemicals in a certain way. Eventually, as these things get more complex, and as millions of years go on in this sort of state of mixing and random change and preferences occurring due to its current situation, then things with potentially biochemical reactions start to happen, and start forming and have a preference to stay that way. These are non-living things potentially acting like living things. And as they start to progress, we then have these chemical reactions forming things that we could consider life. Trying to define life is probably the hardest part of this scenario. Eventually, these non-living but biochemical reactions or chemicals, things, eventually start to form what we currently understand as life. And from there, go on with Darwinian evolution to see what we have today. Now, in my mind, I don't see this as 100% completely accurate. I don't know fully, and science hasn't developed a complete consensus with it. Life could have started on another planet, like Venus, for example. Venus is very chemically active, and a meteor impact could have hit it, and then an asteroid from Venus, a part of Venus, could have landed on Earth with those microbes on it, and then spread in our very habitable zone, in our very habitable planet. This is an idea I have talked about before on a different channel. It's kind of like the difference between having a habitable world and a life-starting world. Just because a world's habitable doesn't mean life can start there. Maybe you need a life-starting world and a habitable world. Just a random hypothesis I had when I was a kid. Venus being the life-starting world and Earth being the habitable world. Life can't grow with evolution on Venus very well until it comes into contact with Earth. I'm not saying this theory is true. I was a kid when I decided that I wanted to look into it. I came up with it after I learnt about the theory or the hypothesis of panspermia. I think it's less likely, so I don't necessarily believe it, but I do like thinking about these things. It's fun to try and think about how these solutions could have arose, rather than just saying, it's in this book and it says God did it.
Number 4, the human brain. The human brain is the most complex object in the known universe. It is able to perform tasks such as thinking, feeling, and creating art. The complexity of the human brain suggests that it was designed by a creator.
Okay, so the complexity argument's getting a bit old now. Just because something is complex does not mean something had to create it. Also, by the sounds of it, the God you guys are trying to explain to me or describe to me sounds extremely complex. Therefore, something must have had to have created it.
Number 5, the moral law. The moral law is a universal sense of right and wrong that is present in all human beings. The moral law suggests that there is a moral lawgiver or God. The moral law is evident in all cultures and civilizations. For example, all cultures have a taboo against murder, theft, and lying. The moral law suggests that there is a universal standard of right and wrong that is not created by human beings.
That might be what it suggests to you, but you're wrong. Stating that there is a universal law that all humans have, some sort of moral code that everyone is born with, is a strange argument because, well, we are aware that there are people who don't have any sense of right or wrong in this regard, as in, for example, and I don't mean to use it in a bad way, but psychopaths. The stereotype of psychopaths generally depicted that they have absolutely no emotions and absolutely no moral code whatsoever. And although true sometimes, psychopaths can be good for society. Being able to remain calm in tense situations, for example, for a surgeon, wouldn't be too bad of an idea. But the idea of a psychopath actually existing goes against your idea here. People who feel no remorse for something like murder. And this doesn't have to always be a psychopath. Someone who simply does not feel any remorse for other people's suffering, like murder or even theft, suggests that not everyone has a moral code. So I wonder where this moral code might come from. Maybe it is humans as a society, as a group, something that benefits the entirety of one's social group, whether it be a small tribal group, whether it be a small town, or a society, or an entire country, or race. The human race. Maybe that's where it all comes from. Maybe that's where our ideas of what is good and bad come from, as to what benefits us as an individual, us as a local group, and us as a species. And where did that come from? Probably evolution when it comes to socializing with each other. There are strength in numbers, and socializing is a way to get good numbers.
Did you know that this is absolute proof that God is real and the Bible is true?
Wow, thank God for that. Finally evidence for the person I just thanked.
The Saudi Arabian government has finally, for the first time in history, allowed people to take pictures of the true Mount Sinai.
Okay, I think I get where this is going. Give me a sec, right. This is a picture NASA took of Pluto.
This was the mountain that God descended on in fire to give Moses the 10 Commandments. That is according to Exodus 19 verse 18.
This is the location that Jerry was revered for calling it a planet and not a dwarf planet. And that is according to Rick and Morty Season 1, Episode 9.
This is the actual mountain in Saudi Arabia. And this dark patch at the top is not a shadow. Rather, when seen from the sky, you can actually see it is entirely burnt.
Even though we know that Pluto is actually a dwarf planet, which Jerry is forced to admit later on in the story.
But there's even more, check this. Right next to Mount Sinai is this massive rock with a giant crack down the middle. It's the same rock that God told Moses to hit in order for water to come out of it.
And wait, there's even more. Jerry was sent back to Earth, which we know to exist because we live on it.
This was literally talked about in Exodus 17 verse 6. Subscribe now if you believe God is real and the Bible's true.
Now, these series of events do not claim that Jerry is God, but they do claim that Rick is God, and it states this fact in Season 5, Episode 2, Multiplicity. Subscribe now if you believe Rick is God, and that everything in Rick and Morty is completely factual and true.
I don't think people understand, but this is one of the biggest facts that proves the Bible's true, and archaeologists have found physical evidence to verify it. After the miracle of crossing the Red Sea, and after the miracle of God descending on Mount Sinai to visit Moses, this third miracle is gonna shock you. Now, we all know the story of Exodus and how God actually told Moses to specifically build an altar so then people could sacrifice to get in covenant with him. And one of the key details of this story was that the altar had to be made of uncut stone. So at the foot of this mountain, which is currently burnt because God actually descended on it, there still remains this altar of uncut stone. So not only do the 3 layers of uncut stone remain, but also the 12 pillars of marble that were next to the altar that represented the 12 tribes of Israel. If you believe the Bible's true, then subscribe for more.
If a book tells a story and you find that something is somewhat true about it, and that's me giving more credit than it might be due, that does not mean that the entirety of the story and everything about it was completely true. Let's give you the credit and tell you that the story is somewhat true. We find the location, and that is the location a guy called Moses claims to have interacted with a god. That does not mean that he actually did, and that does not mean that God is actually real, and that does not mean that your religion is correct. In the exact same way that Rick Sanchez isn't real, despite the idea that even he defeated the devil. Well, those were a disappointing set of videos. I was hoping to find definitive proof of God as promised. But hey, maybe we'll find some in the future. I know I'm an atheist, but I can't disprove God, so therefore he must be some form of possibility, no matter how small. So, if God exists, maybe we should look at reality and keep trying to find the truth about reality and not the truth about religious books. We should start without a presupposition, try to find out how God made the universe, and then try to research it from there. Thank you for watching, feel free to like and subscribe, and if you've seen any compelling arguments, feel free to let me know, and I'll see you in the next video.